Hello everyone, this is Kim Lay with A2Q2, and in this video I'm going to share the answer to one of my top 5 questions asked this year, and that is, what is a sample or example of a timeline for a company that's going through a SPAC transaction and potentially could be a large accelerated filer because of that. And so let me share with you what that timeline potentially looks like. So here I'm sharing an example of a company that is a December 31st year end that has inventory and has started some of the activities maybe a year ago with some light documentation. And what you see on here, it's tutti frutti color, but I'm going to show you, I'll break it down in each of these parts and why it's a comprehensive timeline. And for your circumstances, you can design it to be something much more granular or much more simplified as well. So here on from these rows right here, you'll see from C to H are all of the activities. So the types of activities that we would have is planning, your risk assessments, whether it's your business risk assessment or your IT systems assessments. We place heavy reliance on project management. And then for the rest of it, here are the process owner training. Again, we place high emphasis on training, education, change management, because we realize that for a company, when you're going from private to public, that first year and that second year is really critical. The 6 to 9 months leading up to becoming a public company, you are completely swamped. Your team is heads down working furiously, and many of your team members either have not worked in a public company environment or it's been a while since they've worked in there and need a refresher. That's why process owner training in education is so important. Then we start to list down the different processes, your entity level, your equity processes. So there are 10 basic processes, and then you add in your IT controls, your IT general controls right here. So now let's go through the colors. What do these activities mean? And really the punchline of why it's so critical that if you went public before June 30 and your stock price puts you in the accelerated filer status, there's a boatload of stuff to do. And so here you can see if we are in April, and in the case of all of these planning activities we have, you can also, I have separate videos that dive into each of the activities that need to happen. In this video, I'll focus on the tutti frutti colors and see. So as a 12/31 year end, the first 3 weeks of April, you're going to be closing for Q1. And so you can see here, Q1 close, we put gray on it because most of the accounting and finance team, heads down, going through, closing the books so that they can get the 10Q done, get reports in. And that's why the green bar here represents interviewing and assessing the current processes. And so you can see, as an example, for entity level controls, we're waiting for some of the process owners to be done with their quarter end close activities to really start. So that's green. And the purple right here that you see, the purple represents assessing the gaps, conducting interviews to understand what's currently happening, then taking time to assess what the gaps are. And then this blue right here is making recommendations. And from there, the light green is documenting those controls. So making those recommendations so that your process owners can see, here's where some gaps, what can we put in place now? The light green, then you're able to create documentation or update your flowcharts or your narratives. And in the case of many of our clients, they start out with nothing. So we're doing that heavy lifting, and it's really crunch time to get that documentation. Now, once we have that documentation, we recommend then doing walkthroughs. So the month of June is typically when most companies are doing walkthroughs. And the reason is that the walkthroughs are a show and tell. Process owners are looking at and actually showing you what they actually do. In the green bars, they were telling you by, oh, I opened the invoice, I review and approve. Now in Walkthrough, they're actually sharing it with you and you can visually see. If there's any recommendations, this is why it's so important. You see these 3 red boxes for quarter end controls, for quarterly controls that happen to end at quarter end, like account reconciliations, reserve analysis, those types of things. There is a very short window. You basically have 3 windows of opportunities to put the controls in place. And in order to pass, external auditors are looking for 2 consecutive quarters as close to your year end as possible, which means that you want to nail Q3 and Q4 at the least. That's the bare minimum. Ideally, you're nailing Q2, you're nailing Q3, and you have your team that muscle memory, you're gaining confidence. So again, we recommend those walkthroughs happen before a quarter end so that you can get the feedback real time. Your team can still implement those changes during that quarter close. And then you see we start to test round 1. So we've now assumed at June 30 as a first year public company, let's say you do the SPAC transaction from January through June, you're now public, you measure your stock price as of your market cap, which is based on your stock price and your outstanding shares to unaffiliated shareholders. If you meet the threshold to be an accelerated filer, you're now going to need to do testing because you're now into what we call 404B. And so 404B is where your external auditors have to opine at the end of the year that your controls as of December 31st were designed appropriately, in place, and operating effectively. If you have a series of controls that fail, they potentially can aggregate together and become a material weakness, and that's what we call a failing grade. So you can see here on our timeline, we actually then have put place markers so that we can do some testing in the August to the September timeframe and give you feedback as close as real time as possible so that you can continue to implement changes in the September month if it's a monthly control, and especially for quarterly controls, again, to do it in Q3, again, to get 2 good quarters. So this just shows you the typical timeline that's needed. And then the second round of testing, which happens in the November to December timeframe, this is more around Q3 activities, and most external auditors are also requesting making sure that into Q3, which is October, November, December, there are transactions that are selected in at least that Q4 to make sure your processes are continuing as usual. And that's why you see this testing, this blue bar from November into December, it continues for a while because we're testing the Q3 activity plus some Q4 activity. And if there's any feedback, any deficiencies, again, you have time in the month of December and month of January as you're closing year end to make those changes to save documentation, evidence of review. And then finally, in February of 2022, January, your whole team is really busy closing the books heads down. They start to resurface in February, and that's when we do those annual types of controls that only happen once a year. An example of an annual activity is your 10K filing. There are disclosure checklists, there are your D&O questionnaires. Many of those activities only happen once, and that's why we've put it right here in February for you. So this gives you an idea of how to build out a timeline, what it would look like. And of course, in real life, it's not as clean as it starts August 2nd, it ends August 31st. It typically goes, it's a little more Gantt chart looking by process, by department, and by function, but this gives you an idea. That's it. Thank you so much for joining me and look forward to talking with you soon.